The rain fell on the city docks like a cold, steady sigh. It slicked the asphalt and dripped from the rusty skeletons of old cranes, turning the world into a blur of gray and oily black. Under the weak yellow glow of a single security light, a man stood waiting. He wore a dark jacket, jeans, and held a simple black briefcase. He didn't shuffle or look nervous. He just watched the rain puddle around his boots. From inside his unmarked car, the detective watched him. The detective was a big man with a face that had settled into a permanent frown. He'd been a cop for 25 years, and nights like this felt like most of them. He knew the type by the docks. He'd arrested a dozen of them. The look, the posture, the meeting in the shadows. It was a story he'd read too many times. His name was on a file in his mind. A gang called the Sombra Boys. They ran drugs through these docks. They were young, tough, and came from a specific part of the city. The man under the light fit the picture perfectly. The detective's gut, a muscle hardened by years of seeing the worst of people, tightened. He saw the briefcase and imagined it full of cash or pills. Another man appeared from behind a container, a skittish figure the detective recognized from previous busts. A low-level guy. Words were exchanged. The briefcase changed hands. The detective didn't wait to see what was in it. He'd seen enough. He radioed his position, stepped out into the rain, and moved in. "Police! Don't move." He barked, his voice cutting through the patter of rain. The skittish man dropped his package and bolted, vanishing into the maze of containers. The detective let him go. He was focused on the one with the briefcase. The man turned slowly, his hands held up slightly. His face was calm, too calm for someone caught in the act. "Put the case down." "Hands on your head," the detective ordered. His service pistol held steady. The man complied, placing the briefcase carefully on the wet ground. "Detective," he said, his voice even, "there's a context here you're missing." The words irked him. It was always a story, always an excuse. Context? The detective scoffed, moving forward, his cuffs already out. "I see the context just fine. You're making a deal in the dark." "This is an active federal operation," the man said, his eyes locked on the detective's. "My name is Leo Cruz. Call your watch commander. Ask him to check with the FBI field office." The detective paused for only a second. He'd heard this before, too. Guys claiming to be agents or cousins of the mayor or undercover. It was a classic stall. And this guy, dressed like any other street corner guy, didn't fit his idea of a federal agent. Agents wore cheap suits, not worn-in jackets. They flashed badges. They didn't get caught holding the bag. "Good one," the detective grunted. He grabbed the man's arm, spun him around, and snapped the cold metal cuff around one wrist. "You can tell your fairy tale at the station." The man Cruz didn't resist, but his body went rigid. "You are compromising a 2-year investigation. People are going to die because of this." "Save it," the detective said, pulling the cuffs tight. He felt a surge of grim satisfaction. He'd cleaned up another piece of the city's mess. He picked up the briefcase. It was heavier than he expected. Money, probably. A good haul. He pushed Cruz into the back of his car. The man was silent the whole ride, staring out the window. The detective glanced at him in the rearview mirror. No fear, no anger. Just a deep, unsettling focus. It was strange, but the detective pushed the thought away. He'd seen cocky ones before. They all broke eventually. Back at the bustling precinct, under the harsh fluorescent lights, the scene felt normal. The detective tossed the briefcase onto his desk with a solid thump. He started the paperwork, his fingers punching the keys with a familiar rhythm. He listed the charges. Possession. Conspiracy. He used the name Javier the man had finally given. A name that fit the detective's assumptions perfectly. A young officer, new to the squad with a face still eager to please, wandered over. "Big catch, detective?" "Just another night," the detective mumbled, not looking up. "Get this into evidence, will you? Tag it and book it." The young officer nodded, picking up the briefcase. He started filling out the evidence tag, copying the case number. As part of the procedure, he popped the latches to do a quick visual inventory for the log. The detective heard the clicks, then a sharp, quiet intake of breath. He looked up. The officer was staring into the open case, his face pale. The inside was packed with bound stacks of cash. But the officer wasn't looking at the amount. He was holding one stack, his thumb rubbing against the edge of the bills. "Detective?" The young officer's voice was a whisper. "These bills? What about them?" The detective said, irritation rising. The officer turned the stack. Along the top border of every single bill, in light but clear blue ink, was a tiny, handwritten string of numbers and letters. "They're all marked. Serial numbers are sequenced." He looked up, his eyes wide. This looks like federal bait money. From an inventory sheet. I saw a bulletin about this." The words landed like a physical blow. The noisy room seemed to go quiet. The detective slowly stood up, his chair scraping back. He walked over and took the stack of bills. He saw the meticulous markings, the kind cops make, not criminals. A cold dread, starting in his stomach, began to spread. He turned to look through the reinforced glass of the processing room. The man who called himself Cruz was standing calmly, being photographed. He turned his head as if feeling the detective's stare. Their eyes met through the glass. Cruz didn't smile. He didn't glare. He just gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It wasn't a gesture of, "I told you so." It was the look of a professional watching a critical, foolish mistake unfold in slow motion. And in that moment, the detective's certainty, his gut feeling, his 25 years of experience, all turned to ice inside him. The cold feeling in the detective's stomach stayed right there, a hard knot of dread. He stared at the marked bills in his hand, the blue numbers feeling like they were burning into his skin. The noise of the precinct, the phones, the typing, the low chatter, all of it seemed to fade into a dull hum. He looked back through the glass. The man, Cruz, was just watching him. There was no smirk, no anger. It was a flat, empty look that was somehow worse. The detective walked slowly to the processing room door, pushed it open. The air felt thicker in there. "You?" he said, his voice sounding rough to his own ears. "You said you were FBI." Cruz didn't answer right away. He just looked at the detective, like he was studying a puzzle. "I did," he finally said. His voice was quiet, calm. "You should make that call now. There was a protocol for this. You stopped everything. You called the supervisor." But stopping felt like admitting he'd made a huge, career-ending mistake. The part of him that was proud, that had been right so many times before, wanted to push forward. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe this guy was just smart, planting a story about marked bills. "Let's talk," the detective said, nodding toward the interrogation room. He needed to control this, to find a crack in the story. Cruz simply nodded. He was led to the small, plain room with the metal table and the mirrored wall. The detective sat across from him, placing a notepad down, a pen. Old habits. He didn't turn on the recording equipment. This wasn't official anymore. This was something else. So, Leo Cruz, FBI. The detective leaned back, trying to look like he was still in charge. "Badge number? Who's your supervisor?" Cruz recited a number, a name. He didn't blink. He gave the name of the assistant special agent in charge downtown. A real person. A name the detective had heard before, and interdepartment memos. The knot in his stomach tightened. You were meeting a known somber lieutenant. The detective pressed, his tone hardening. I saw the handoff. You saw what you wanted to see, Cruz said. There was no accusation in it. It was just a fact. That money was going to be tracked. We were following it to the person who washes it for them. A city official. You just pulled the plug. A city official? The detective scoffed, but it sounded weak. And where's your wire? Your backup? An FBI agent doesn't do a handoff alone. For the first time, a flicker of real emotion crossed Cruz's face. It was frustration, quickly buried. My backup was tracking the lieutenant. My wire was in the briefcase, which is now in your evidence locker. You moved in too early. You saw a face that fit a box in your head, and you jumped. The words hit home. The detective felt his face grow warm. He stood up, his chair screeching on the floor. You sit tight. He left the room, closing the door harder than he needed to. He walked back to his desk, his mind racing. He had to call it in. He couldn't ignore the marked bills. He picked up his desk phone, his finger hovering over the keypad to call his captain at home. This was going to be a brutal conversation. He never got to dial. The main doors of the precinct burst open. Not with violence, but with a force of authority that made everyone look up. A woman in a sharp, dark suit led 3 other serious-looking people. She had an ID wallet open in her hand, held high. Her eyes swept the room and landed on him like a laser sight. "Detective," she said, walking straight toward his desk. Her voice was clipped, cold. "I am Assistant Special Agent in charge Reed. Where is Agent Cruz? And where is the evidence you seized?" The entire bullpen was silent now. Cops stopped typing. The room held its breath. The detective could only gesture weakly toward the interrogation room. "He's in there. The briefcase is booked." S.A.C. Reed didn't say another word to him. She snapped her fingers at one of her agents, who went straight for the evidence cage. Another went to the interrogation room. The detective just stood there, frozen. As the machinery of the federal government rolled right over his night, he saw Cruz exit the interrogation room, rubbing his wrist where the cuff had been. Cruz didn't look at the detective. He went straight to Reed, and they spoke in low, urgent tones. The detective saw Cruz shake his head, his jaw tight. Reed's expression turned from anger to something colder, more dangerous. She finally turned and walked over to him. His own captain, looking pale and startled, had appeared at his side. "Detective," Reed said, her voice low so only he and the captain could hear, but it carried in the quiet room. "You have just compromised an 18-month deep cover operation. You have possibly endangered the life of a civilian informant. You interfered with a federal investigation into organized crime and public corruption. Every piece of evidence you touched tonight is now tainted." The captain closed his eyes for a second. "Agent Reed, there will be a full internal review, of course." "There will be," she cut him off. "But for now, effective immediately, this officer is suspended. All his cases are frozen. He will turn in his badge and weapon to his captain. Now." The words "suspended" and "badge and weapon" echoed in the detective's head. He'd never been suspended. He'd never even had a formal complaint. For 25 years, his badge was who he was. He fumbled with his holster, his fingers feeling thick and stupid. He unhooked it, placed the gun on his desk. He took the badge from his belt, the metal warm from his body, and placed it next to the gun. It looked small and meaningless sitting there. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. He could feel 100 eyes on his back. He didn't look at anyone. He pushed through the doors and out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The city was quiet. He got into his personal car, An old sedan, and just sat there for a long time, his hands on the steering wheel, not moving. The humiliating scene played over and over in his mind. The look on the young officer's face, the calm fury of the federal agent, the cold, disappointed stare of his captain, and Cruz's eyes through the glass. He started the car and drove, not really heading home. He just drove through the wet streets, the streetlights streaking past. He felt empty, a shell. He was a detective without a badge, a cop who had messed up so badly he'd helped the bad guys. After an hour, he pulled into his driveway. The house was dark. His family was asleep. He sat in the car, not ready to go inside and face the silence of his own life. That's when his personal cell phone in the cup holder buzzed. Not a ring, just a short, sharp vibration. He didn't recognize the number. He almost didn't answer, but habit made him pick it up. Hello? There was a pause on the line. Then a voice, strange and flat, like it was coming through a computer, spoke. The money you took belongs to us. The FBI has it now. You created this problem. The voice was calm, utterly without emotion. You fix it. Get our money back, or we will bury you and your family under this city. The line went dead. The detective sat in the dark, the phone still pressed to his ear. The cold knot in his stomach wasn't dread anymore. It was pure, solid fear. He wasn't just suspended. He was a dead man walking, and he had no idea how to run. The detective sat in his car until the sky began to lighten from black to a dull, weary gray. The words from the phone call played on a loop in his head. Asterisk, bury you and your family. He looked at his dark house, imagining his wife asleep inside, his son in his room. The fear was a physical thing now, a tight band around his chest. He couldn't go to his own police department. The call proved they knew who he was, where he lived. They had people inside, or they were watching him. His captain? His old partner? He didn't know who to trust. Going to the FBI felt just as impossible. He'd humiliated them, destroyed their case. They'd probably laugh him out of the room before throwing him in a cell. He was trapped. There was only one person who might understand the hole he was in. Because that person had watched him dig at Dot, it took him most of the day to find him. He used old contacts, called in favors from people who didn't know he was suspended. He drove to a quiet, older neighborhood with small, well-kept houses. He parked a street over and waited. Finally, in the late afternoon, he saw him. Agent Cruz was taking out the trash. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans. He looked like any other guy, not a federal agent. The detective got out of his car and walked across the street. Cruz saw him coming and froze. He didn't reach for a weapon, but his whole body went still, like a watchful animal. The detective stopped at the foot of the driveway, keeping his distance, his hands at his sides. They called me, the detective said. His voice sounded rough, unused. The people who owned the money, they want it back. They threatened my family. Cruz didn't look surprised. He just nodded slowly, placing the trash bin down. Come inside, he said. Not the front. Around back. The back of the house was sparse. A small patio, a few chairs. It felt like a place no one really lived in. The detective stood awkwardly. I didn't know. About the operation, he started. You didn't ask, Cruz said, cutting him off. He wasn't angry. He was matter of fact. You saw my face, and you made a decision. That decision got a man killed last night. The detective felt the words like a punch. Who? My informant. The man you saw run away. He wasn't just some skittish guy. He was a father of two who was trying to get out. He gave us everything. When you arrested me, the cartel got spooked. They thought he set them up. They found him this morning. The detective said nothing. There was nothing to say. The weight of it, the real-world cost of his mistake, settled on him completely. It wasn't about a suspension anymore. It was about a life. "I need help," the detective whispered. "Why would I help you?" Cruz asked. He finally looked at him directly. "You blew my cover. You destroyed an investigation that was about to expose a city councilman on their payroll. You got my asset killed. You are, professionally speaking, a walking disaster. Because they'll kill my wife," the detective said, the words bursting out. "They'll kill my son. I have nowhere else to go." Cruz studied him for a long time. He walked over to a small table, picked up a file, and tossed it toward the detective. It was a surveillance photo. It showed the detective in his own car, watching the docks 2 nights before the arrest. "You were on their radar already," Cruz said. "They have a pipeline. They pay off cops to look the other way on certain shipments. They thought maybe you were trying to shake them down by yourself, stealing that briefcase. Or maybe you were a loose cannon they needed to clean up. My arrest made you interesting to them." The detective stared at the photo. He had been following a different lead, a hunch about stolen cars. He had no idea the cartel even knew he existed. "So what do I do?" he asked, defeated. Cruz sat down. He let out a long breath. "You have one thing they want: access, or at least they think you do. You're a suspended cop, desperate, in trouble. That's a story they might believe. You want me to talk to them?" The idea made his skin crawl. "I want you to listen to them," Cruz corrected. "You're going to call them back. You're going to be a scared, corrupt cop who wants to make a deal. You tell them you can get the money back from the FBI evidence lockup for a price and safe passage out of the city. You'll need proof, something only a cop would know." "We'll provide that, we?" the detective asked. "If I do this, you're not a citizen in distress. You're a CI, a confidential informant. You work for me. Every word you say to them, you say to me first. Every meeting is on my terms. You step 1 inch out of line, and I don't protect you. From them or from federal obstruction charges." It was a devil's bargain. He'd be working for the man whose life he'd ruined, dangling himself as bait for a cartel. But it was the only thread he had to pull. "Okay," the detective said, the word tasting like ash. "Okay, I'll do it." Cruz gave a short, humorless nod. "Good. First, you need to understand what was really in that briefcase. I saw the money." "The money was for show," Cruz said. "The real product was in the lining. A new, pure batch of fentanyl. Powder form. Enough to kill a neighborhood. We needed to see who took delivery from the lieutenant after the handoff. That was the distributor. The man who puts it in bags and sells it to kids on street corners. When you arrested me, the lieutenant got spooked and vanished. The distributor never showed. That poison is still out there, somewhere, because of you. So this isn't just about saving your skin. This is about finding that product before it hits the streets." The detective felt sick. He had thought it was about guns or dirty money. It was about something far worse. He thought of his own son, teenagers in the city. His mistake had consequences he couldn't even see. Cruz stood up. "Go home. Act normal. They'll call again. When they do, you tell them you need a meeting to talk terms. Nothing on the phone. We'll wire you. We'll be there. You don't try to be a hero. You just be scared and greedy. That's your role now. Can you do that?" The detective looked at his hands. They were the hands that had cuffed an FBI agent. The hands that had signed the form that got a man killed. They were shaky. "I can do it," he said, not sure if it was true. As he walked back to his car, the world looked different. The quiet street wasn't peaceful. It was a place where things were hidden. His own home wasn't a sanctuary. It was a target. He was no longer a hunter. He was the bait in a trap he helped build. And the only person he had to trust was the man he had wronged the most. The next 2 days were the longest of the detective's life. He moved through his house like a ghost. He smiled at his wife, talked to his son about school, but his mind was 1,000 miles away, locked in a small, soundproof room in an FBI safe house. That's where he and Cruz planned it. The room was bare, except for a table and a recording setup. Cruz was all business. He drilled the story into him. "You're not a good cop gone wrong," Cruz said, his voice flat. "You're a greedy cop who saw a chance. You got suspended, you're about to lose your pension, and you want a payout to disappear. That's it. You're scared, you're angry at the department, and you see a way out. That's the truth they'll believe." They gave him details to sell it. Specific codes from the evidence room, the name of the night shift sergeant, things only a cop would know. They fitted him with a wire, a tiny, cold device taped to his skin. It felt like a brand. The call came on the evening of the second day. The same robotic voice. They agreed to a meeting. A warehouse by the old rail yard. Midnight. Now, standing in the shadowy, cavernous space. The detective felt the wire like a live insect on his chest. The air smelled of dust and old oil. High above, a few broken windows let in slices of moonlight. Cruz's voice was a faint, calm whisper in the tiny earpiece hidden in his ear canal. "We're set. Just stick to the script. Breathe." A door creaked open at the far end. 2 figures walked in. One was the skittish lieutenant from the docks, looking even more nervous. The other was a new man. He was older, dressed in a neat, expensive-looking jacket. He moved slowly, calmly. This was not a lieutenant. This was someone with authority. The detective's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the man Cruz wanted. The local commander. The older man stopped a few feet away. He looked the detective up and down, his expression unreadable. "You have a proposal," he said. His real voice was soft, almost polite. The detective swallowed. He forced the scared, greedy words out. "I can get the money. The briefcase. The FBI has it in their secondary evidence locker. I still have friends. I can get it swapped out with dummy bills. I need $50,000 for myself and a car to the state line. No tracking." The older man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. A policeman with friends. How convenient. He took a slow step closer. "And why should I trust a man who already interfered with my business?" "Because I'm desperate," the detective said, the truth of it bleeding into his act. "They took my badge. I have nothing. This is the only play I have." The man studied him. The silence stretched. In his ear, Cruz whispered, "He's testing you. Hold your ground." "The money is one thing," the older man said, "but the product inside was more valuable. It is now lost because of your theater with the FBI. That is a larger debt." The detective's mind went blank for a second. The product. A fentanyl. Cruz hadn't prepared him for this angle. He had to think fast. I can find out about that, too. I still have access to reports. I can find out if they seized it, where it is." It was a weak offer. The older man's smile faded. He glanced at the lieutenant, then back. "You are not very convincing, detective." Panic started to rise in the detective's throat. This was falling apart. He was going to fail, and they would kill him right here. Then the older man's phone buzzed in his pocket. He held up a finger, a strangely normal gesture, and answered it. "Yes?" He listened, his back slightly turned. The detective could only hear mumbles. Then the older man said, clearly annoyed, "I told you, only call this number for the cleanup. Is the problem with the distributor handled? Is our police contact ready to move the new shipment?" The words police contact sent a chill down the detective's spine. Cruz had been right. There was a corrupt cop. Here was the proof. The older man listened again, then sighed. "Fine. Tell him his payment is in the usual place. And tell him next time his man needs to be more careful. We cannot have loose ends like the last one." Loose ends like the last one. The informant. The man who was killed. The older man hung up and turned back, his focus returning to the detective. But the detective wasn't listening to his next demand. His whole world had narrowed to one shocking, sickening realization. He knew that voice on the other end of the phone. Not the words, but the tone, the rhythm of speech. He had heard it for 15 years, in patrol cars, over coffee, in his own home. It was the voice of his old partner. The man he'd trusted with his life more times than he could count. The blood drained from his face. His mouth went dry. He stared past the cartel commander, his eyes wide with a horror that wasn't part of the act. The older man saw it. He saw the genuine, unfiltered shock. His polite mask vanished instantly, replaced by cold suspicion. "What?" he snapped. "What is it?" In his ear, Cruz's voice was sharp. "What's happening? Stay with the script." But the detective was frozen. His mind was screaming. Asterisk his partner. His friend. The one who stood by him at his wedding. The police contact. Asterisk the betrayal was so huge, so personal. It short-circuited every thought. The skittish lieutenant saw his boss's change and reacted from fear. He yelled, "He's wired. He's listening to someone." The older man's hand flashed toward his jacket. "Down. Get down now." Cruz's voice screamed in his ear, but the detective was a second too slow, paralyzed by the shock. A gun appeared in the older man's hand. The muzzle flashed, a bright orange stab in the dark. A searing hot punch slammed into the detective's shoulder. The force spun him around, and he crashed to the concrete floor, the breath knocked out of him. The pain was immediate, a white-hot fire spreading down his arm. Gunfire erupted from the shadows. Cruz's team was moving in. Shouts, running footsteps, the deafening roar of bullets echoing in the huge space. The detective lay on the cold ground, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping hot through his fingers. He saw the older man and the lieutenant running. Scrambling for the far door. Then, a figure was beside him. Cruz. He wasn't shooting. He was crouched over him, his face tight. "Where are you hit?" He barked. "Shoulder," the detective gritted out. The pain was making his vision swim. Cruz pressed a hand hard against the wound, applying pressure. His eyes were scanning the chaos. "You froze. Why?" The detective looked up at him, the truth tumbling out with his ragged breaths. "The phone call? The police contact on the phone. It was my partner. My old partner." For a fraction of a second, Cruz's professional mask slipped. He looked down at the detective, and in his eyes, there wasn't anger anymore. It was something else. A grim understanding. The worst betrayal wasn't from a stranger. It was from the person you shared a locker with. The shooting stopped as quickly as it started. Agents were securing the area. The lieutenant was on the ground, cuffed. But the older man, the commander, was gone. He'd vanished into the night. Cruz helped the detective sit up against a metal pillar. "Medic is coming," he said, his voice low. He kept pressure on the wound. "You identified a corrupt officer. That's something. But you also let the main target get away. Because of a personal shock." The detective nodded, shivering from pain and shock. He had been bait, and he'd almost gotten swallowed whole. The trap had sprung, but it hadn't caught the biggest animal. And now he was shot, His secret was out, and the man he had called a brother was the enemy. The warehouse, filled now with flashing lights and federal agents, felt emptier than ever before. The pain in the detective's shoulder was a deep, constant roar, but it was nothing compared to the silence in his own head. In the back of the speeding FBI van, a medic patched him up. The bullet had gone clean through, a lucky wound. Cruz sat across from him, his face lit by the passing streetlights, saying nothing. They didn't take him to a hospital. They went to the same bare safe house. As the medic finished, Cruz spoke. "Your partner. Tell me everything. Now." So the detective talked. He talked about 15 years of friendship. He talked about the man's laugh, his kids, the times they'd watched each other's backs. He talked about the small changes he'd missed, the new car, the nicer vacations, the excuses for being unavailable. He felt stupid with every word. When he was done, Cruz simply nodded. "Stay here. Don't call anyone." He left, and the detective was alone with his betrayal and his throbbing shoulder. The next hours were a blur. He dozed fitfully on a cot. Sometime near dawn, Cruz returned. He looked tired, but there was a sharp focus in his eyes. "We picked him up an hour ago," Cruz said, his voice flat. "At his home. He didn't fight. He talked fast. He gave us the city councilman, the name of the distributor who has the fentanyl, and a list of 3 other dirty cops. He's trying to deal." The detective absorbed this. His friend, his brother, had folded immediately. There was no loyalty, just a scramble to save himself. And the commander? The older man? "Gone, for now," Cruz said. "But we have the distributor's address. We move in 30 minutes. You're coming. Why?" The detective asked, exhausted. "Because you owe a debt," Cruz said. There was no cruelty in it. It was just a fact. "And you need to see this through to the end." They rolled up on a quiet, run-down apartment building just as the sun was properly rising. It was a stark contrast to